Hi there. This slideshow is ostensibly about how to develop confidence for a job interview and then show that confidence in the interview. However, it's really kind of a quick overview of lots of things about interviewing, so I think you'll find it very helpful. But confidence is extremely important in an interview. Employers are really attracted to candidates that have a lot of confidence, and there are a lot of ways that you can develop it and show it, and we'll go over those in this slideshow. One of the best ways to develop confidence for an interview is simply to prepare for the interview. And it's also a great way to stand out because, frankly, surprisingly, most people really do not prepare for interviews. They basically just plan to wing it. So one of the first things you can do to prepare for an interview is to learn about the different types of job interview questions. And the lineup of questions here is different from what's in your textbook. Your textbook classifies types of interview questions in a different way than I would say that most career experts do. I'm going to go over these in greater depth, and whenever there's an alignment between what's in your textbook and this list here, I'll point that out. But the ways that I'm going to talk about or the types I'm going to talk about are the traditional or screening question, the off-the-wall question, behavioral questions, case questions, situational questions, and illegal questions. The traditional or screening type of interview question is the most common type. This is the type that you're going to find lists of all over the internet. If you type in frequently asked interview questions, these are the types of questions that are most likely going to come up. And again, you're going to find unlimited examples of these on the internet to be able to practice with. So these are questions that you've probably heard in interviews before. Things like, tell me about yourself, which of course is not even a question. What is your greatest weakness? And why should we hire you? Just a few examples of some very common questions. The behavioral interview question has become extremely popular with employers over the last 30 years or so, and it's based on the premise that past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. So as I say, there are a lot of large and small employers using behavioral interviewing, and it's a really important kind of interviewing to understand and be prepared for, although it's not easy to be prepared for because you don't always know what kinds of questions are going to be asked. But that, as I say, these are based on past behavior, so they're usually going to start out with something like, tell me about a time, or describe a situation. And the best way to answer a behavioral interview question is with a story. And there are a number of different story formulas you can use to respond to a behavioral question. One of the most popular is the STAR formula, situation, task, action, results. And the way that works in reality is you describe the situation that you found yourself in, usually some kind of situation that needed improvement, and the task that was required to do that. Tell the actions that you took, and then tell the results that you got. And there's a lot more to behavioral interviewing, and you'll see on the page where this video appears, there's a book on behavioral interviewing that tells you pretty much anything you'd like to know and has lots of examples in it. And by the way, the handout that goes with this slideshow will give you a lot of additional resources about these various aspects of interviewing. The next type of interview question is the situational interview question. And these are really very similar to behavioral questions, except they're asked in a more hypothetical way. Instead of asking you about the past, they're kind of asking you about the future. What would you do if you were in a certain situation? So since these are basically hypothetical questions, as you might have guessed, they line up with the hypothetical questions that are in your textbook. Next is the off the wall interview question. And these are not too common, but they do pop up from time to time. These are those kind of goofy questions that interviewers ask. They ask them for a variety of reasons. Most of them don't really have a whole lot to do with your qualifications for the job, but they ask you these questions to see how well you think on your feet, see how creative you are, see if you can respond without getting all flustered. And sometimes they're honestly just kind of sadistic interviewers who want to see you squirm. But these are kind of goofy questions like if you were a superhero, what would you want your powers to be? Or, if you were an animal, what kind of animal would you be? Or if you were a food, what kind of food would you be? Or if you could have dinner. So the trick with this kind of question is to not let it fluster you. Maybe take a moment to think about it a little bit and just do the best you can with it and don't worry about it too much because it's probably not going to be a make or break kind of question. The next kind of question is the case interview question, and this one too is not very common and it's typically used with only certain kinds of employers. Primarily consulting firms, sometimes banking firms use these, but and they're often used with new MBA graduates or new college graduates, business school graduates, for example. And there are several kinds of case questions, but a couple of them that are really common are kind of a hypothetical situational question that is very specific and very, business case related, like this first example. Your client is a $300 million a year copper mining company. This year has lost 50 million. How do you turn it around? And then another really common type is the brain teaser type. How many gallons of gasoline does an average gas station in America sell on an average day? And a lot of times, what they're really looking for with case questions is how you arrive at your response. They're less interested in the response itself than how you go about answering it. And that's especially true of the brain teaser type. I wouldn't worry too much about these because they're really only asked in specific types of professions. But it's good to know that they exist and that you might come across them someday. And you can, of course, read more about them in the resources cited in the handout. Your textbook refers to illegal interview questions as inappropriate questions, and that is certainly true. You could sort of use inappropriate questions as an umbrella category that would include illegal interview questions because sometimes questions can be asked that aren't actually illegal but are inappropriate. And these would be things like, tell me about your child care arrangements. Are you married? How many children do you have? Things like that that are not legal to ask and are just completely inappropriate. So the best way to handle an illegal or inappropriate question is try to figure out exactly what the employer is really trying to get at. What are they really concerned about? What's the underlying worry here? So, for example, with tell me about your child care arrangements, they may be worried that you'll have a lot of absenteeism if you don't have reliable child care. So, you have some choices in the way you can answer questions like this, but some of the choices are more effective than others. For example, you could simply refuse to answer an illegal question, but that's probably not going to be a very good strategy for endearing yourself to the employer. So, a better approach is, again, to figure out what they're really concerned about and answer it by saying something like, I can assure you that my child care arrangements will not have any effect on my reliable attendance at this job. Something like that. And you can, again, check the handout for some more resources about examples of illegal questions and how you might handle them. Now, here's a suggestion for how to prepare for responding to interview questions that might be a little bit unusual. You might not have heard about this before, but I recommend composing written responses to common interview questions because doing so really cements them in your mind and helps you organize your thinking about how to answer a given question. I have seen this done many times. I've done it myself. I think it's really, really helpful. You don't want to write a script for yourself, and you don't want to try to memorize your answers, but the process of writing just helps you cement those concepts in your head so that you're a lot more comfortable answering. You can kind of picture what you've written down when you're asked the question, and it'll be much easier to respond. Again, your handout has a link to an article about this topic, so I would suggest you check that out and try this the next time you go on an interview. Now, an absolutely vital preparatory step for going on an interview is to research the employer, because I can almost guarantee you will be asked a question that is some variation of, what do you know about our company? It might be something like, what do you like about our company? Or, what can you tell me about our company's products? Or some variation of that. So it's really critical that you research the company and be able to answer that kind of question in the interview. And the next thing you can do to prepare is to actually practice interviewing. And I talked about this also in the slideshow about nonverbals in the interview. But I would suggest that you find somebody to sit down with and do a mock interview, a practice interview with. I would be happy to do it with any of you if any of you have interviews coming up. You could get a friend or a family member or go to the career office at your school. Lots of possibilities for doing mock or practice interviews, but I definitely recommend it. And you could do one where the other person focuses on the content you give and gives you some feedback about the content, or you could do one that focuses on your nonverbals and your body language and so forth. Or you could have the person critique everything, critique the whole package. And then, of course, the other thing you can do is record yourself so that you can see your performance and see what quirky behaviors you might have, and put yourself in the mindset of the interviewer and evaluate how you come across to an interviewer. It's hard to feel confident if you're worried about the details of actually getting to the interview. So, to boost your confidence, I recommend that you do some things to make sure all the logistics and details are squared away before you ever go on the interview. So the first thing I would do is call the company or the employer, the interviewer, or the interviewer's assistant to confirm your appointment and maybe ask for directions if you don't know. Or if you prefer, you can certainly get directions online through Google Maps or MapQuest or something like that. And of course, you might be using a GPS to actually get to the interview, but make sure you have a pretty good idea of how to get there before you go. And then you might even, if you're like me and you easily get lost, you might actually consider a dry run. If this is a local interview and you're not really sure how to get there, drive it a couple days ahead of time to make sure you can find it. And doing a dry run is also helpful because it tells you how long it's going to take you to get there, so you can make sure you're not late. Then on the actual day, you want to be sure that you leave early enough to allow for the unexpected, like bad traffic or construction or weather, things that might make you late. And if you do end up running late, call the employer on your cell phone and tell the interviewer that you're going to be late. Now, this might disqualify you or at least make you lose some points with the interviewer, but it's certainly better than not calling at all and just showing up late. Here are some things that you can do the night before the interview to psych yourself up, to boost your confidence. Now, the first one is from our friend Amy Cuddy from the TED Talk that we had earlier in the term, the Fake It Till You Become It, the power pose. And this is something that you should actually do sooner than the night before. You should do it right before the interview, like when you get to the workplace of the prospective employer. Go to the ladies' room or the men's room and do your power pose for 2 minutes to boost your confidence and make you feel powerful. You could also do it the night before, but it's going to be more effective if you do it right before. But some other things you can do the night before: find somebody who really likes you and has a great opinion of you, like your mother or your spouse or really good friend, and just tell that person how wonderful you are. Just brag on yourself and boost your confidence by talking about how terrific you are. You can also do that just by yourself, looking in the mirror. Just tell yourself how wonderful and awesome you are and how you're going to be fantastic in this interview. Just basically psych yourself up. And finally, as illustrated with the graphic on the far right, visualize the interview. Visualize yourself performing really, really well in the interview. Those are all some things you can do to pump yourself up and make yourself more confident psychologically before the interview. This is about planning your nonverbals and your body language and practicing them. And I'm going to go through this really quickly because I already covered this in the slideshow about interview nonverbals. But you want to have a firm handshake that's not the limp fish and it's not dripping with sweat. You want to have really good eye contact, and to avoid looking creepy, you can look at the bridge of the interviewer's nose. A smile is super, super important in an interview because it makes you seem enthusiastic. Obviously there are going to be some things that you say in the interview that a smile doesn't really go with, but you should try to smile as much as possible whenever it's appropriate in the interview. And I believe the very best thing you can do to show your confidence in the interview is to have really strong voice projection. Just a really strong, clear, not exactly loud voice, but certainly a voice that can easily be heard, and not a soft little baby voice or any kind of a voice that sounds timid. You just really want to come across as very confident with that good, strong voice. And finally, don't be afraid to pause before responding to a question. A pause can be a really, really powerful tool because often if we start talking the second a question is asked, we're going to blurt something out and just kind of start babbling. So you don't want to take too long, but just take a few seconds to gather your thoughts and prepare what you're going to say. You can also buy yourself a little time. If you're really thrown by a question, you can buy some time by, for example, asking the question to be repeated, or you can repeat it back yourself to make sure that you understand it. If you're really, really stumped or thrown by a question, you can ask if it's okay to come back to that question later. Again, that's a little bit of a risky move because that's something that might possibly lose you a couple points with the employer, but it's better than just being deer in the headlights or babbling something or, just not having any answer to the question. So use those strategies to try to um, give your mind some focus to answer the question in the most effective way. And there you have the 9 ways to build confidence for the interview and express them in the interview. And if you have any questions about any of this, please feel free to ask me.